Really good to see you, my friend. Been a while, but thanks for giving up some time. As Bailey just said, really good to see you. And as she just said, we've just been having a conversation about DAOs and NFTs and that sort of stuff. And I guess often the question is like, what does this practically mean for me if I'm just interested in an amateur kind of way, or even professionally, if I'm leading something like a charity or a church even, or whatever it might be, what's the practicality, what's the utility of this stuff? Anyway, we can touch on some of that in a mo, but tell us a bit about your background with Bitcoin. Take us back to 2012, Myles, when you were thinking about this stuff.
Well, me and my wife were living in India at the time, and I guess we didn't really have any friends. It's the like basic fact of it. Like, we didn't really know anyone. So we used to go to these meetup groups for expats, right? People living in the city I was in. And I went along to a few of them, met a few people, and a bunch of them were talking about crypto, and I had like no clue what it was until me and my wife really connected with this couple who had been over from Canada, and they were working in robotics. And while we're having dinner with them, he said something. He said something about, man, if we were using Bitcoin, this would just be so much easier. And I was like, what's Bitcoin? And his wife was like, oh no, I won't talk about Bitcoin. So I was like, no, tell me about Bitcoin, because I've heard of you guys talking about it. And so he just started telling me all about how it's like, there's no centralization, no one owns it, there's no organization, there's no bank. And I was just like, man, this is wild. Like, how does this money work? Like, how do you transfer value from each other? It's like, it totally blew my mind. And it was kind of in that, I think that evening I went home and I just went to such a deep dive on the internet and just started finding out all about Bitcoin. And probably a few days later, I bought my first couple, for like $40 or $30 each or something then. And I just had no clue. I got into it because I just thought this has the power to really revolutionize banking, transferring wealth between each other, and just value between different people. And I think really for me then, one thing was a real kicker, is that we found it really hard to transfer money from the UK to India. There's some countries that are a bit closed, right, where they don't allow money to go in and out of the country. So when I discovered Bitcoin, I used to use Bitcoin in 2013, I think, around 2013, to send money from our savings to India and use it in India. And it was only costing me like $8 or $10 or something to send like £1,000 or something like that, compared to using Western Union, which was charging me like 7 or 8%, something like that. And then I had to pick it up in cash in the Western Union branch and some dodgy place and take this huge wad of cash in Indian money. And so for me then, that was when I was like, this has I just felt like I was just looking at this new thing that no one else had heard about. And I was talking to different people and everyone was like, what are you talking about? That's kind of how I found out about it. But it was just like chance conversation. But probably, chance conversation, but probably comes from just this drive towards curiosity and meeting new people. And I think if I just stayed friends with the people that I worked with, I would never have met people who are working in different industries and told me about these new things.
And so, real early adopter in 2012, looking at that and curiosity, as you said, it drove you forward to find out more and connect with this. But think about the last 10 years. So you've been exploring, dabbling, learning for the last 10 years about crypto and the crypto landscape. Tell us can you paint a bit of a potted history of the last 10 years? What are the key features? What have we missed?
Well, I'm just trying to get my lighting there, but I think it's up. Well, I think that Bitcoin still is kind of in the Wild West of finance instruments, right? So I think we're still not really in a place where it's like widely accepted as something that's kind of safe and mainstream. I think people still feel like it's like, and actually recently, even last week, a sort of large Bitcoin company declared bankruptcy and a load of people lost their savings there. So and there's no protection, as in America, there's no financial service authority or wherever the equivalent is in America to back up those savings. So it definitely is still the sort of early days of banking, like before the dollar. Like in America, 120 years ago, there was no dollar. It was just like a bunch of different bank issued currencies, right? And I think this is what people don't know or sort of forget, is that really pounds have been around for a long time, fair enough, but the dollar, the main currency of the world, hasn't been around for that long. And it wasn't that long ago when gold was still being used to transact in America, and other bank currencies were being used to transact. So it's kind of in that stage, I would say, at the moment. But to answer your question, over the last 10 years, I feel like I've gone from being like a total nut. I remember coming back from India and going to quite a smart dinner party in West London and telling some business friends, you guys need to like put some of your company savings into this thing called Bitcoin. Like, instead of having your like cash, your backup cash in pounds, what's the point of having like 3 months wages in pounds? Why don't you have like 2 months wages and then a month's wages in Bitcoin? If you need it, you can get it out. They were like, no, you're crazy, you're wild. But I have actually gone back to those conversations and screenshotted the send to my friends, being like, dude, you have several Bitcoin now. But answer your question, 10 years. I think what happens is every 10 years, the level of adoption steps up. And we can chart this really easy through the blockchain and see how many people are using Bitcoin and how many people are adopting it and selling it and buying it and holding it. The adoption curve is like slowly starting to hit this bell, which is starting to rise. But every 3 years, I don't assume everyone knows about it, but every 3 years, 3.5 years, the sort of the release of Bitcoins, or the mining of Bitcoins, you probably heard, goes down. So it's harder to mine them. And every 3 years is when the price spikes. If you look at the Bitcoin chart, it goes like from $1 to $10, and then it goes back down to $1, and then 3 years later it goes to $100, and then back down. Then it was 1,000, then it hit 20, and then 3 years later, which is just last year, it hit $69,000. But every 3 years, there's these memes on the Financial Times where it's saying Bitcoin is dead, Bitcoin is dead, Bitcoin goes to 2,000, it's dead, Bitcoin goes to 10,000, it's dead. And I think I've gone through enough of those cycles now to feel like I just don't think Bitcoin's going to die right now. It just keeps on surviving. It's just like this zombie that keeps coming back to life. But what I've noticed over the last 10 years is that just tracking it and learning about it, and just obviously being so interested in studying it, it's just like every year or every month, it felt like in the last 2 years, like every week there was a new institution or hedge fund or pension fund or insurance company that were saying we're going to hold to Bitcoin. And I think when I started in Bitcoin, the thought that like a company in the FTSE 100 or a NASDAQ company would hold some Bitcoin on their balance sheets was just wild to me back then. I think over the last 10 years, it's just like the adoption rate of Bitcoin has just gone to another level, which I just didn't know that was going to happen when I first got into it. I mean, I wasn't in it for the profit. It was in it for like the world changing potential for it. But obviously, I think probably the major thing is when I first bought Bitcoin, there was only Bitcoin, there was nothing else. And now we've just got like thousands and thousands of other alternatives. And that is a massive change as well.
Myles, it's really helpful just to get some of the backstory to this, and there'll be a range of people watching this that some that have got lots of experience, like the people we just had on just before you, others that are just beginning to become aware of this, which is probably where I fit in the last year or so. But I'd love to. Do you have any YouTube videos or resources, papers that you would suggest we might be able to read, or if people want to gem up on this stuff?
Well, there's a guy called Michael Saylor, and he has an organization called MicroStrategy. It's like a software company. It's it's like a couple billion turnover company. He's gone big. He's gone actually mad, Bitcoin maxi on Bitcoin, and he's published a bunch of videos with a few other people. And for me, that's like the best resources for people to find out more about Bitcoin. He speaks very eloquently about it, and I think that Michael Saylor, if you just YouTube him. The other thing to look at is the Bitcoin white paper, which was written by Satoshi Nakamoto, who's like the founder of Bitcoin, who no one knows who he is or where he's gone. But this white paper, it's only like 10 pages long, but it's like, I mean, he wrote it ages ago. No one knew about it, but it's the sort of rules of Bitcoin and how it works. And it's quite heavy, but the first 2 or 3 pages give you like a deep overview of what the person who started it, or group of people, if it was a group of people who started it, want to achieve. And it's kind of wild now that they're already sort of achieving some of their aims. even like 12 years after it started. But the Bitcoin white paper is like the sort of, if you're into it, it's like the gold standard thing to read if you want to really find out more about Bitcoin.
That's really helpful, Myles. Thank you. And just thinking, as we've got a minute or two of your time left, but just thinking, I mean, again, like we're just scraping the surface here, but it's so good. And I think there's a lot of people that are interested. And I think particularly think about the application for this. We may have missed the boat, the average person buying some Bitcoin right now, but certainly the technology, the blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, what's any thoughts on application for this stuff in a profit or not for profit space?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is like, don't feel like you've missed the boat, because obviously it's divisible by like hundreds of decimal places. So it's actually fine to buy like a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin, which I say to everybody, just buy like 50 pounds of Bitcoin or 100 pounds of Bitcoin or whatever is like nothing to you, to just put into something and forget about it forever. So don't think it's anyone's missed the boat. We're so early in the adoption stage, but the application I think is more for like developing nations, I think, where inflation is high. It's hard to like keep your spending power when inflation is up at like 20, 30, 40%. And people who are, the beautiful stories I've heard about Bitcoin, even though it's like so up and down, is around people buying Bitcoin to preserve their savings rather than buying steel or a stereo or like gold. It's just easy to be paid the equivalent of $50 and think, right, I'm going to buy some Bitcoin because it might go up and down 20%, but compared to losing 40, 50, 60, 70% in inflation, it's a much safer bet if their currency is out of control. So for me, I can just see, that's where Bitcoin adoption is amongst the highest, is in some developing nations where inflation is crazy and they have those sort of despotic rulers that can't keep control of the currency. So in terms of your faith and outlook to the world, I think the adoption of Bitcoin has more potential in developing countries than it does actually for us, probably in the West. We're probably here sitting thinking, why do we need Bitcoin? Because we've got the pound, it's fairly stable. But most people in the world don't have that.
It's really interesting. I was hearing about just thinking about the idea of radical transparency that blockchain creates for people. So if you're making a donation, then you get to, there's such transparency that wasn't available before. So in terms, you talk about developing nations, the possibility of making it easier to get aid money to where it's needed, where it needs to get to. Is one little example. But
well, the other thing was, when everything started kicking off in Ukraine, there was a huge fundraising drive from the Bitcoin community. I think they had like $1.something billion of crypto sent to Ukraine directly to people. And it was so easy to get the money in there. It's like really, really easy. You don't have to use any banks. You don't have to do any Swift can't ban it. It just gets sent straight directly to whoever you want it to go to in a second, for hardly any money.
Yeah. Myles, thank you for your time. This is I feel like I've got a lot of reading, a lot of learning and watching to do now. But thank you for giving us some time tonight. If people want to connect with you, is that possible? Where could we send them?
You can hit me on Instagram. It's just Myles Dhillon. That's probably the easiest way. Or podcasts, Plain English Investing. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way. Just start on my Instagram.
The name of the podcast again?
Plain English Investing.
Brilliant. Okay, everyone, you need to check that out. Listen to that. And but Myles, thank you so much. God bless you. Thanks again for tonight. We'll see you soon.